Everyone thought Daniel was calm. That was the strange part. He smiled when people interrupted him. He nodded when people misunderstood him. He apologized even when he wasn't wrong. And every night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling with a chest so heavy it felt like he was drowning quietly inside his own life. Nobody noticed. Not his co-workers, not his family, not the people who called him too sensitive. Because people only see the version of you that helps them sleep at night. And Daniel had spent most of his life making sure everyone else felt comfortable, while he slowly disappeared. The strange thing about emotional exhaustion is that it rarely looks dramatic. Most people don't collapse in public, they answer emails, they laugh at jokes, they say, "I'm fine." They keep showing up. And then one day, something inside them quietly dies. Daniel was 34 years old. He worked in a gray office where every day felt identical, the same fluorescent lights, the same fake conversations, the same exhausted faces pretending to be motivated. Every morning he sat in traffic listening to podcasts about self-improvement while feeling himself emotionally deteriorate. He kept thinking, if I explain myself better, maybe people will finally understand me. So he explained, constantly. He explained why he was tired, why he didn't answer messages immediately, why he needed space, why he felt overwhelmed, why he seemed distant, why he canceled plans, why he looked sad sometimes. But the more he explained himself, the more invisible he became. Because the truth is, people who never try to understand you will only use your explanations to judge you more carefully. And Daniel didn't know that yet. His childhood had trained him for this. He grew up in a house where emotions were treated like inconveniences. If he cried, he was dramatic. If he got quiet, he had an attitude. If he expressed pain, someone always had it worse. So he learned something dangerous very early. Love had to be earned through emotional sacrifice. He became easy, low maintenance, understanding, helpful, available. The kind of person everyone leaned on, but nobody truly saw. And those people often become adults who apologize for existing. Daniel became one of them. At work, his manager overloaded him with responsibilities because Daniel never complained. His co-workers dumped unfinished tasks on him with sentences like, "You're just better at handling stress." But they didn't know he was having panic attacks in the bathroom. They didn't know he sat in his car during lunch breaks staring blankly at the steering wheel because his mind was too exhausted to process another conversation. Modern life has created a strange kind of loneliness. People are constantly connected, and emotionally abandoned at the same time. Everyone posts smiles, nobody posts emptiness. So millions suffer silently while believing they're the only ones falling apart. Daniel believed that too. Every night he scrolled through social media watching people announce engagements, promotions, vacations, achievements. Everyone seemed ahead, everyone seemed happier, everyone seemed emotionally stronger. And comparison slowly poisoned his self-worth. Because social media doesn't just make people jealous. It makes ordinary pain feel like personal failure. Daniel stopped feeling human. He started feeling defective. One night, around 2:13 a.m., he sat alone in his apartment eating cold takeout beside the glow of his phone. 37 unread messages. Most of them from people wanting something. Advice, favors, emotional support, help. Very few asking, "How are you really doing?" And suddenly, he felt tired in a way sleep could never fix. That kind of tired is dangerous. Because it isn't physical. It's the exhaustion of constantly performing emotional labor for a world that barely notices your existence. He put his phone down, looked around his apartment. Silence. Not peaceful silence, lonely silence. The kind that forces you to finally hear your own thoughts. And for the first time in years, Daniel admitted something to himself. He wasn't afraid of being alone. He was afraid nobody would choose him unless he kept explaining why he deserved love. That realization broke something inside him. But strangely, it also freed him. A week later, his mother called. She complained that he never visited enough. Normally, Daniel would spend 20 minutes explaining work stress, exhaustion, emotional burnout. Trying desperately to make her understand. But this time, he simply said, I've been overwhelmed lately. There was silence. Then she sighed dismissively. Well, everybody's overwhelmed. And for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't defend his pain. He didn't argue. Didn't over-explain. Didn't beg to be understood. He simply said, maybe. Then he ended the call. And afterward, he sat there waiting for guilt. But something unexpected happened. His chest felt lighter. Because peace begins the moment you stop forcing people to acknowledge wounds they benefit from ignoring. That was the beginning. Not a dramatic transformation, not sudden confidence. Just tiny moments, quiet moments. Moments where Daniel slowly stopped abandoning himself for approval. He stopped writing paragraphs trying to explain boundaries. He stopped convincing emotionally unavailable people to care. He stopped rehearsing conversations in his head at 3 a.m. And most importantly, he stopped believing misunderstanding meant failure. Because mature people eventually learn something painful. Not everyone misunderstands you accidentally. Some people misunderstand you because the version of you they created is more convenient than the truth. And no explanation can heal a person committed to seeing you incorrectly. One afternoon at work, his manager blamed him for a project delay caused by another department. The old Daniel would have panicked. Over-explained, provided evidence, written long emails, stayed awake stressing about his reputation. But that day, he simply stated the facts calmly. No emotional performance. No desperation. And when his manager still looked unconvinced, Daniel let it go. That terrified him. Because he realized how addicted he had become to controlling people's perception of him. Most overthinkers aren't just afraid of failure. They're terrified of being misunderstood. So they spend years emotionally exhausting themselves trying to manage everyone's opinion. But peace cannot exist where constant self-defense lives. Daniel was beginning to understand that. A few months later, he met Sophia. Not in some cinematic way. Just accidentally. A bookstore cafe on a rainy Thursday evening. She sat near the window reading quietly while thunder rolled across the sky. Daniel noticed something unusual about her. She looked peaceful. Not performative peaceful, not social media peaceful. Real peace. The kind people develop after surviving themselves. They started talking, slowly and naturally. And unlike most people, Sophia didn't interrupt his silences. That mattered more than he expected. Because emotionally exhausted people don't crave attention. They crave safety. Weeks passed. One evening, while walking through dim city streets glowing with neon reflections after rain, Daniel apologized for being distant lately. He started explaining his stress, his anxiety, his emotional shutdowns. Then Sophia stopped walking. She looked at him gently and said, "You don't have to explain your humanity to me." Daniel felt something tighten in his throat. Because nobody had ever said that to him before. Most of his life had been spent proving his emotions were valid enough to deserve compassion. And suddenly, someone was giving him permission to simply exist. Without defense, without justification, without performance. That moment stayed with him. Because sometimes healing doesn't happen through advice. Sometimes healing happens when someone finally stops making you feel difficult for being human. But healing is not linear. There were still nights Daniel spiraled. Still mornings he woke up anxious, still moments he almost sent long messages explaining himself. Trauma creates habits. And people-pleasing is often trauma wearing politeness as a disguise. One night an old friend accused him of changing. That word haunted him. Changing. Because when people benefit from your lack of boundaries, your healing feels offensive to them. The old Daniel would have apologized. Instead, he simply replied, "I think I'm finally becoming honest." And after sending that message, he sat quietly in the dark. Heart racing, hands trembling. Not because he was wrong. But because growth often feels like guilt before it feels like freedom. Months passed. Slowly, Daniel's life became quieter. Not emptier, quieter. And there's a difference. Some people disappear when you stop overgiving. That's not loss. That's clarity. He stopped chasing friendships built only on convenience. Stopped forcing conversations, stopped begging emotionally unavailable people to communicate. And in that silence, he discovered something shocking. He actually liked himself. Not the performative version, not the useful version, not the agreeable version. The real version. The tired version, the emotional version, the imperfect version. The human version. For years, he had confused self-worth with usefulness. But human beings are not machines. You do not need to earn rest, you do not need to earn compassion, you do not need to earn your right to exist peacefully. And the people who only value you when you're useful, never truly valued you at all. One winter evening, Daniel walked home through cold streets while snow drifted softly beneath yellow city lights. He noticed something strange. For the first time in years, his mind was quiet. No imaginary arguments. No replaying conversations. No anxiety about how others perceived him. Just silence. Peaceful silence. And he realized something profound. The reason he had always been mentally exhausted wasn't because life was too hard. It was because he had spent his entire life trying to emotionally survive inside other people's opinions. That realization changed him. Not overnight. But permanently. One day his father criticized his career choices during dinner. The old Daniel would have defended himself desperately, explained his goals, his struggles, his intentions. This time, he simply listened. Then calmly said, "I understand that's how you see it. Nothing more. No emotional war. No self-erasure." And for the first time, Daniel understood true emotional maturity. It isn't winning arguments. It's no longer needing to. Because some peace only arrives when you stop asking people for permission to trust your own experience. The world teaches people to constantly perform. Perform success, perform happiness, perform strength, perform productivity. And slowly, people become strangers to themselves. Daniel had spent years curating a version of himself that felt acceptable. But acceptable is not the same as alive. One of the saddest things about modern adulthood is how many people quietly abandon their authentic selves just to avoid rejection. And yet rejection still comes. So eventually you must ask yourself, if people might misunderstand me anyway, why am I sacrificing my soul trying to prevent it? Daniel finally stopped. And that changed everything. His anxiety didn't magically disappear. But it softened. Because overthinking loses power when you stop believing every misunderstanding is an emergency. He slept better. He laughed more genuinely. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes, stopped obsessing over delayed replies, stopped attaching his worth to attention. And slowly, life became lighter. Not perfect, just lighter. Which is sometimes enough to save a person. One evening Sophia asked him, "What changed you?" Daniel looked out the window quietly. Rain tapped softly against the glass, cars moved slowly through distant streets, the city hummed like a tired heart. Then he smiled faintly. And said, "I got tired of translating my soul for people committed to misunderstanding it." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then nodded. Because some truths don't need explanation. They only need recognition. The deepest peace Daniel ever found did not come from achievement. Not money, not validation, not success. It came from finally realizing. His emotions did not need a courtroom. His pain did not need unanimous approval. And his existence did not require constant justification. That realization healed parts of him therapy alone could never reach. Because healing begins when a person stops asking, "How do I make everyone understand me?" And starts asking, "Why do I feel worthless when they don't?" That question changes lives. Years later, Daniel would still have difficult days. Still moments of insecurity, still moments where old habits returned. But now he noticed them differently. With compassion instead of shame. That matters. Because people heal faster when they stop treating themselves like enemies. And maybe that's what so many exhausted people truly need. Not more productivity, not more self-improvement. Just permission to be human without apologizing for it. Some nights Daniel still sat alone by the window. But the loneliness had changed. It no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like peace. And there's something beautiful about reaching a point in life where silence no longer scares you. Because silence is terrifying when you've spent years avoiding yourself. But once you finally meet yourself honestly, silence becomes home. The truth is, most people are carrying invisible emotional wars. Smiling while grieving, working while depressed, helping others while quietly falling apart. And many of them are exhausted not because life is impossible, but because they keep trying to prove their pain is real enough to deserve kindness. Maybe you are one of those people. Maybe you explain too much, maybe you apologize too often, maybe you overthink every interaction, maybe you fear disappointing everyone, maybe you feel guilty for needing rest. Maybe you have spent years shrinking yourself just to make others comfortable. And maybe, you're tired. Deeply tired. If you are, listen carefully. You do not need to explain every emotion. You do not need to convince everyone to understand your heart. Some people never will. And that is not a reflection of your worth. The right people will not require endless proof of your humanity. They will simply meet you there. Calmly, honestly, without making you beg for compassion. And until those people arrive, please stop abandoning yourself trying to earn acceptance from people committed to misunderstanding you. Because peace is expensive. And one of the highest prices you can pay for it, is letting go of the exhausting need to constantly explain who you are. That was the day Daniel finally changed. Not because the world became kinder. But because he finally did. To himself. And strangely enough, that changed the entire world around him. The noise became quieter, the pressure became lighter, the loneliness became softer. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt like he was fighting to exist. He simply existed. And in that quiet acceptance, he found something he had searched for his entire life. Peace. Real peace. The kind that arrives softly, after years of emotional storms. The kind that whispers. You do not have to keep proving your pain to deserve love. And maybe tonight, that is exactly what someone needed to hear.